Over the prairie, the sun blazed like a fire. As the hawk circled, the dry breeze carried the scent of gun oil and horses. Above the ground that is crumbling, for a full day, a woman was chained to a wooden fence, with her clothes hanging in tatters, her wrists swollen, her lips split, her eyes half open, and perspiration and dust sticking to her body. She hadn't consumed any food, or even a drink of water. Around the rope, flies collected on the dried blood. Each breath felt like a shattered prayer. Eliza Monroe was her name. Hours ago, she had ceased yelling since no one had arrived. Her voice was as parched as sand when she whispered to the wind. "Open it up, use force." The words sounded odd, frantic, and interspersed with she wasn't pleading for embarrassment. In order to put an end to her pain, she was pleading with someone to cut the rope. Her voice was borne by the wind through the deserted hills until it came to rest on a wagon that creaked up the path. With his hat down and his face scorched from years of intense sunlight, a tall guy sat at the rein. 48-year-old rancher Jackson Hale had lost everything. His pride, his land, and his livestock. The cabin in front of him was meant to be his new beginning, purchased sight unseen from a local vendor in need of urgent cash. Back in town, Jackson recalled the seller's warning. "Hale, be careful. Strangers purchasing land that isn't intended for sale is not well received by certain locals." Back then, he had dismissed it with a laugh, treating it as if it were trivial conversation over whiskey. However, he now remembered the man's apprehensive expression. Perhaps this valley wasn't as silent as he had assumed. Peace, however, was not what awaited him. The air was glimmering with heat when Jackson arrived at the cabin. He believed someone was intruding when he noticed smoke billowing from the chimney. Then from the fence line he heard a faint wail. He leaped to the ground, his boots striking the parched ground, weak but human. He initially believed it to be a trick of the light. The post cast a shadow. Then he caught sight of her. Eliza was gasping for air and was bleeding. Jackson clenched his throat. He drew his knife and stepped forward. She opened her eyes just enough to catch a glimpse of him. "Open it up, use force." Once more her voice broke, uncertain. He froze until he noticed the rope slicing into her wrist. He cut it clean, light as a ghost. She fell forward and crashed into his arms. Her hands automatically went to her tummy, as though she were protecting something valuable. Even if he didn't fully get it yet, Jackson saw the move. She uttered a weak, scarcely audible breath. "My baby has to live." Jackson held the knife in his palm as he froze. He heard Samuel's voice in his mind. "Brother, you don't walk by someone who's in difficulty out here." Perhaps that's why he was unable to leave her. Even so, she made an effort to stand. Her knees failed her. She refused to stay down, though, and groped for the barrier. Before she could touch the ground, Jackson grabbed her. Behind their weary eyes was something savage, the type of fire that is difficult to put out. He placed her on the floor of the cabin and dabbed some water on her lips. After dipping a cloth into the pail of water, he gently applied it to her forehead. Her breath was shallow and her skin was scorching. She uttered a gentle whisper each time she stirred. Jackson listened to the flies outside while he sat next to her. "Thank you, cowboy love stories," she muttered as she opened her eyes at last. "Who is returning? Who has done this to you?" "They'll track me down." "They always do." The hair stood up on Jackson's neck. He wanted a piece, but it was gone. One question lingered in his mind as the wind blew the scent of smoke from the hills once more. Really, who was she? The cabin smelt like dust and coffee when Eliza woke up. Jackson had a troubled expression on his face as he sat beside the table, hat off. He had bandaged her injuries and used ripped fabric from his own shirt to wrap her wrists. Already, the morning heat was seeping through the wall's crevices. The air outside glistened like glass. Still feeble, she attempted to sit up. "Where am I? You helped me, but why?" Jackson spoke steadily and quietly as he poured her a cup of water. "I had you bound at my fence. I couldn't simply pass by." Her hands shaking, she took the cup and drank. Like pure luck, the water struck her throat. A second later, she raised her gaze to his. "Why did you purchase this land?" "There is only heat and dust." Jackson shrugged slightly while keeping his gaze on the window. "I needed a spot where I couldn't be found by the past." She smiled a little bitterly. And I suppose I was fleeing from mine. Between them, the air became heavy but not frigid. They both understood for the first time. Sometimes the reason you continue is more important than where you end up. They will return shortly. Who are they? Your parents? No Western tales about men who never give up until they achieve their goals. Jackson took a quick look out the window. Heat glowed on the trail below, but his attention was drawn to something else. A cloud of dust, riders. He quickly drew his gun from the wall and stood. His boots made a creaking sound on the wood. As he cocked the lever, there was the clang of metal hitting metal. The horses snorted outside, their feet eagerly slapping the ground. Eliza's complexion turned white. Her breathing sped up. They located me. Jackson glanced through the drapes. 3 men riding horses are heading directly for the cabin. The front one rode high. The dark-coated, black-bearded kind that exuded mischief. Eliza trembled as she spoke. Malcolm Vane is his name? It was him who done this to me. Jackson tightened his jaw. The name had a familiar sound, like a ghost from a past existence. He recalled the town's tales of a land baron who forced people to leave when they wouldn't sell. And that man was approaching now. The podcast, Wild West Stories, is headed directly to his door. Jackson approached the table, loading each shell individually. You remain where you are. However, Eliza took hold of his sleeve. She was so scared that her eyes were blurry. He's too strong for you. You're not aware of his potential. Jackson looked her in the eye. Outside, I've already encountered people like him. The horses came to a halt. Boots scuffed the ground. The hot air carried the voices. Hale, come on out. We are aware that you are inside. Jackson stopped. They were aware of his name. She had never heard him say that. He gave Eliza a look. You told him what? Her expression was filled with panic as her eyes widened. He always manages to find out, even when I say I didn't. There was a loud knock on the door. Then another. The walls shook with the noise. The voice of Malcolm blasted through the heat. You've forced me to pursue you for too long, Eliza. Hurry up and leave before someone is harmed. With his hand steady on the weapon, Jackson inhaled. Outside, the air was still. She said, You'll never close that door again if you open it. Another blow caused the door to tremble. Jackson's hand tightened. The door exploded. With dust whirling around their boots, 3 men entered. The cabin's atmosphere became quiet. With his revolver in his hand and his eyes alert, Malcolm Bain loomed over the doorway like a storm cloud. Slowly, well now, he said. There's my runaway wife, Eliza said, clenching her fists. With his rifle low but ready, Jackson made a single stride forward. Calmly, this is private property, he declared. Malcolm grinned. That particular smile that never made it to his eyes. I own everything I touch. That woman was one of them. Jackson could sense his old rage building, similar to the kind that had burnt when he lost his brother, his family, and his property. He spoke steadily. The woman claims that she is not your spouse. Malcolm's eyes darkened when he watched Wild West romance films. However, the law states otherwise. One of Malcolm's men, Cowboy, was a scrawny man with a scar down his cheek. Get closer. His hand was close to the pistol. Jackson remained motionless and did not blink. He had a gut feeling that this was more than a domestic dispute. This dude is a terrible person. Malcolm walked slowly forward while looking around the cabin. Hale, you know, he murmured quietly. You remind me of a rancher I used to know up north. Obstinate old idiot who believed that honor and land were worth dying for. Jackson got cold. Hail, Samuel, Malcolm went on, seemingly relishing the sound. That was his name indeed. The earth swayed. Jackson's sibling. 6 months prior, the same Samuel was discovered shot on a trail. The same path close to Malcolm's property. He inhaled sharply. Just what did you say? Malcolm smiled. I suppose he ought to have sold when he had the opportunity. Jackson reached for his revolver. Malcolm, however, held up his hand. Now wait, let's do it right. He threw away his coat. Me and you. One chance, one draw. You prevail. I walk away victorious. The woman returns home. Liza's voice cracked as she moved between them. Please don't. He will murder you. Jackson never took his eyes from Malcolm's. My brother was already killed by him. Both men went outside. There was a heavy sun. Malcolm grinned. Definitely a win. Jackson's sorrow gave way to icy concentration. Justice was at issue here. The air became heavy. Jackson was able to hear his own pulse, steadily and slowly. Malcolm smirked as one corner of his mouth curled into a squinted eye. The entire prairie held its breath when the wind died. A hawk screamed out in the distance. Then silence. 1. Jackson jerked his fingers. 2. Their eyes met as sweat trickled down his cheek and pricked his wounded lip. 2 men are looking down the line between death and life. 3. Then the final dazzling flash appeared. The world burst into pieces. If you've listened this far, you might want to take a sip of tea slowly and give yourself some time to calm down. Breathe now. Tell me something before we proceed to the next section of the story. What time is it right now, and from whence are you hearing this? Additionally, please click the subscribe button if you enjoy hearing about bravery and justice on the old frontier. You won't ever miss what comes next that way. The gunshot reverberated throughout the parched field. After a wildfire, dust hung in the air like smoke. Malcolm was lying on the ground with his rifle partially drawn and his pride leaking into the ground when it cleared. Over him, Jackson stood with his chest heaving and a strong gunpowder odor. There was silence for a long time. The world fell silent. With tears streaming down her cheeks, Eliza hurried out of the cabin. Jackson brought his weapon down. "It's over," he said in a whisper. With a shout, one of Malcolm's men reached for his gun. One rifle shot boomed from behind Jackson before he could turn. Dropping, the man clutched his arm. The antique rifle continued to smoke as Eliza stood in the doorway. Malcolm's eyes, however, snapped open for a final time as he struck the floor. Even with blood on his lips, he continued to smile cruelly. "Hale, do you believe this is over with me? You have no idea who controls this valley." That evil smile persisted, even after his blood blended with the dust. "They will come for what is rightfully theirs." He then became motionless, his final words being carried into the dust by the wind. Her aim was flawless, and her voice was steady. "It won't miss the following shot." Jackson gazed at her in wonder. He no longer had the frail woman he had discovered bound to his fence. This one was calm, fierce, and prepared to defend herself. He continued to catch his breath as he approached her. "Where did you get your shooting skills?" She glanced back at him after glancing at the weapon. "I learnt from my father before things went wrong." She sat down carefully in the cabin, her hands shaking once more. With one palm against her stomach, she pushed away the water that Jackson had poured for her. His eyes narrowed as he froze. "You are in pain." After a lengthy silence, she shook her head and muttered, "I'm pregnant." Between them, the word weighed heavy. Jackson blinked, uncertain of how to respond. He was suddenly struck by the realization. She hadn't merely been fleeing an abusive husband all these time. She was rushing to keep a child safe. Eliza's voice broke as she went on. "It's not his baby. The man I love died before he even knew." When Malcolm learnt of it, he said, "Whether I wanted it or not, the child would be his heir. Whether I had to get away, I had to keep my baby safe." Jackson looked into the fire and realized that she wasn't running, but rather defending the last remnant of her love. Outside, a horse neighed. Jackson looked through the window and noticed movement down the trail. This time, he saw the glint of metal badges in the sun. Lawmen. Eliza gripped his arm, panic returning to her eyes. "They will believe that I killed him." Jackson's heart was racing. He glanced at her before turning to face Malcolm's lifeless body in the ground, and he understood that this battle was only getting started. Because truth isn't always important when the law comes in. When the policeman arrived, the sun had already begun to set. Smoke and dust filled the air. Sheriff Morrison got off first, looking about the area. The woman with the rifle, the dead man, and Jackson standing silently next to her. Morrison's gaze grew strained. "Malcolm Vane, isn't that right?" The man had influential friends. Immediately, one of the deputies spoke out. "I noticed the woman with the firearm, Sheriff. He was shot by her." Eliza remained silent as her hands clenched around the rifle. Morrison looked at Jackson. "Are you one of his hired guns, a drifter or Hale?" Jackson took the silver watch from within his vest. "This belonged to Samuel Hale, my brother. He was killed by Malcolm. Examine the interior." Morrison opened the timepiece. His fingers trembled as he held the tiny folded map inside. His voice was suddenly lower as he glanced up at Jackson. "Samuel's brother is you. I was acquainted with him. He was a decent man. I'll follow through on this personally if what you're stating is accurate. He heard what they had to say. He observed Jackson's brother's silver watch, the documents attesting to the forced marriage and the bruising on Eliza's wrist. His expression changed as he discovered the chart Samuel had concealed within. At last, justice took shape. The sheriff's team discovered a cave in the hills to the north of the cabin 3 days later. There were letters, land deeds, and other records that revealed Malcolm Vane's true identity. He had been killing everybody who stood in his way, threatening families and grabbing water rights. In his path, every man who had aided him was targeted by the law. The court returned the stolen item and cleared Eliza's name. She was now a survivor rather than a runaway. As summer gave way to autumn, Jackson rebuilt the cabin. He grinned guilt-free for the first time in years. Eliza was hanging washing outside one calm morning as the sun rose over the hills. "The baby kicked for the first time today," she murmured quietly as she glanced up and saw Jackson on the porch. He grinned. "What name are you thinking?" She lightly touched her abdomen. "Samuel, if it's a boy." Jackson nodded, his eyes hazy beneath his cap for the guy who made it all possible. He turned his gaze to the orange-burning sky towards the horizon. Life will sometimes take away everything you own in order to provide something better. The path to peace can occasionally cross fire. Perhaps that is the lesson to be learnt here. Fighting is not what that courage is for. When others won't, it's about standing up for what's right. That hope can return home, even in the face of loss and heartache. Tell me, would you have put everything on the line for a lady you hardly know if you were Jackson? Would you have acted morally and drew your gun? Breathe deeply, take a drink of your tea, and give that thought some time to dwell. If this story resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button, like it, and share it with someone who could use a little encouragement today. There are more stories to come, tales that serve as a reminder that daybreak always finds a way, no matter how dark the night grows.